Well, it's April 1st, April Fool's Day, 2007. We're at the home of Tom Griffin and his family. And we're going to do an interview today first with Tom Griffin, and then we're going to talk with his twin sister, Bess Griffin. So I think we'll start with you, Tom. Can you hear me?
Just barely, yes.
Can you? Okay. Should I move?
Yeah, go ahead and move up.
I'll move up a little closer. So I know my voice doesn't carry. I'm not in the. No. Okay. Is that better?
That's better.
Can I speak up? Okay. Once again, we're at the home of Tom Griffin and his family, and we're going to be talking first with Tom Griffin, and then with his sister Bess Griffin Gurgich. So, Tom, can you tell us when and where you were born?
When?
When and where you were born?
Born here on the ranch. The house that I was born in has been changed. It's not the same anymore. But it was in 1912.
1912. All right. And what was the name, or what is the name of the ranch? I thought doesn't it have a name today? You call it?
Everything had a name, but
What's the name of the ranch?
my father, who didn't believe in that, so we never had a name for the ranch, actually.
Well, I guess that's recent. Jan says you call it Evergreen Ranch.
Well, yeah, my wife is called it the Evergreen Ranch.
All right. So who was the first member of your family to come to this area?
My grandfather bought the ranch in 1868, and it's been here ever since. Somebody in the family has been here ever since.
And what was his name?
The grandfather?
Your grandfather's name?
James Griffin.
Thomas Griffin.
Thomas Griffin.
Thomas Griffin. So
yeah.
you were named after your grandfather then?
Yes, I guess so.
And then your father's name and your parents' name. What were your parents' names?
George Griffin.
Yeah,
and Jesse Dukes.
Jesse Dukes.
George Griffin, and my mother's name was Jessie Dukes as a girl.
So they lived here on the ranch, and what did they do while they lived here?
Well, you worked all the time to make a living.
Really? They
had their own vegetables, and they had their own cattle, and they had their own everything practically. This was raised right here, and then they lived off it.
How many acres? Do you know how many acres?
65.
65 acres. And that's what you still have here today is 65 acres?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And do you know why they came to this area, the Martinez area?
No, except that it was somewhat developed, but the land was cheap.
The land was cheap.
And that would have been a strong part of it, because it was a hard life in those days, and they'd collected some money together working and bought the place, which was much larger at that time. When they bought it, there were hundreds of acres when they bought it.
Really? So it was larger than it is today?
Oh, yes.
Oh, right. Okay. And did the creek, the proximity of the creek to the property, or did that play a part in their deciding to settle here?
I doubt it had anything to do with it.
You don't think so?
I don't think so.
What about the importance of water, the source of water? Was that important in their decision to buy this property?
Well, I don't think that had anything to do with it, probably, but the creek had usable water in it, which wells and so forth, the water wasn't usable that they developed. So the creek would have been a source of water.
told me the other day when we were talking about the headwaters to the creek, where the creek starts up in Briones. Can you tell us about that and the part that your family has played in the water rights of that water?
Well, the creek starts up in the hills a mile or so from here, and came running down the creek all the way, and they made little dams and then dammed the water, and then they used the water that they got from the dams to drink and to eat and for the cattle and everybody else. The water here developed by wells. It was unusual practice. For some reason it's very poor water.
The water down in the valley
Yeah.
is poor.
Yeah.
But you were able to use the water coming from the headwaters of the creek
Yeah.
for drinking and
Yeah,
whatever.
that's right.
And what about, you told me about some pipes that bring the water down from up in the hills?
Well, we eventually put a pipe all the way up to the with the water source. For many years, there'd be a little dam in the creek, and then there'd be some pipe going to where it was used, like to this place here. We had a pipe from a little dam and brought the water over the tops of the hills and so forth that way.
And did other people use the water that actually came down in through your property? Were there other people in the valley that used that water?
Well, I'm sure there were below us here.
Below.
Between here and Martinez, there would have been, yeah.
All right. What kind of work did you do for during your lifetime?
Me?
What kind of work?
Well, sales work primarily.
Oh,
I worked for an Eastern company that built wheels and body parts and so forth for automobiles. And I ran their San Francisco operation.
And you continued to live here on the ranch?
Yes.
And how many children do you have, Tom? How many children?
5.
5.
Wait a minute. 6.
Okay.
What are you forgetting?
You have 6 children then. Do you remember their names?
No. No, there's a girl named Alice, and a boy named
Peter and Stephen.
Robert. Peter, Stephen, and Robert, and the one that has the winery. What?
Robert. Robbie. Robbie.
That's Robert. Oh, okay.
And he wrote a book, a little pamphlet about the Alhambra Valley with a friend, right? That Bess just gave us a copy. He wrote about Alhambra Valley, Robert.
Yes.
Was that Robert that
High-school
wrote that?
project?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Bess gave us a copy of that, so we'll have that in the museum now. We're grateful for that. So you've talked to us about the water rights. Can you tell us some more about how you were able to obtain water rights from the headwaters up in Briones?
Well, in the early days, the water ran and you used it. That was the rights you had. As the area where the water originates was sold, why there were times when it was iffy, but for the most part, there was never any real problem. And then when the park bought it, we were included in as part of the operation using their water.
So you actually have legal rights to the water that runs down through your property.
Yes, you do. You could always, after using it for many years, you could fight for user rights and so forth, but we never had to do that.
Well, that's good. Well, that must be an important, that's an important document you have that gives you the right to use it.
Yeah.
What was the creek like when you and Bess were growing up here on the ranch? What was the creek like? Was it larger than it is today? Smaller?
Well, as I remember, when I was a kid, there was more water running in it than there is at the present time.
Really?
And that was because we had some wet years, and there'd be considerably heavy runoff sometimes.
You talk about wet years. Do you remember any of the years that the creek flooded?
No, I don't remember the number of the year.
Did you have flooding problems here on the ranch?
Pardon?
Did you have flooding problems here on the ranch?
No.
You were up high enough, maybe, that...
The creek would run, but it didn't bother us any as far as the overflow or anything like that.
Well, that's good. That's good. What do you remember most about living by the creek? Was it the use of it, playing in it?
My memory of it mostly is playing in it.
Really?
We'd do all kinds of things in the creek. There were animals in the creek, and we'd play with them, and there were, it was an interesting place.
What kind of animals did you have along the creek? Do you remember?
Well, they were mostly no, I don't remember the names of them.
Did you have any beaver? There's a beaver dam down the creek, down by the marina now. Did you have any beaver up here in the
I don't
creek?
think that. I never heard of any beaver around here.
What about ducks? Were there ducks?
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 Not unless they were domestic ducks.
Oh, really?
People living further up might have had ducks. I don't remember them.
We're sitting in front of a structure here. Can you tell me what that structure was at one time?
Well, it was built to have pigs in. The pigs raised small pigs in there, and when the creek the back end fell off into the creek, and so we just left the front end up.
So this is actually where the pigs lived. Did it go out over the creek where they lived?
Sort of, yeah.
Sort of.
It was boarded up and had a floor in it, and they lived there.
Was there concern about pollution?
Pardon?
Was there concern about pollution of the creek when you lived here?
No. I don't remember any problem from anybody about it.
You talked about the water in the valley when people dug wells. What kind of water what was the quality like?
It was terrible.
Really?
And very little of it. The people across the road down here dug a well 200 feet, and they got no water. But we had a well on this place, and the water was unusable. It stank, and it was brown. You wouldn't want to use it for drinking.
I wonder why that is. Is it the water table? I wonder what causes the water to be alkaline like that.
I don't know.
They never talked about that?
No, we never got involved in that. We never used it, really.
Do you remember how far down you had to go for the well?
Well, I think the well that was here, which was down near the road, was probably maybe about 20 feet deep, something like that.
Did you go to Martinez schools, Tom?
Yeah, yes.
What schools did you go to, attend?
Well, there was Martinez Elementary and Alhambra High School, and then I went to the junior college.
And did you have any siblings other than your twin sister Bess? Did you have siblings, other sisters or brothers?
Had a brother, but he was 20 years older than I.
He was older.
Yeah.
And where did he go to school?
Same thing.
Same thing?
And we went to University of California.
I see. At one time there was a school down on Release Valley Road at the corner. Do you remember that school?
Oh, yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, it was a typical country school. It had eight grades in one room, and the teacher would live with a local family, and that was part of her pay, was her ability to live with a family and help them. And the school was there until 1916. Anyway, the year that we started the school, which should have been 17 or 18 probably, they closed this school, and a bus ran to Martinez, so we went to school in Martinez.
So you took a bus into town?
Yes.
The schoolhouse was there in the 40s because we played in it growing up.
Well, our grandfather gave that land for the use of the school as long as it was used as a school.
As long as it's...
And so then Tom took it back when
Right.
it was no longer a school for quite a few years.
That's what I had heard, that your father had deeded, or given that land for the school. Is that what they call the Alhambra Valley School? Was that what it was
It's
called?
the only one in the valley.
It was the only school in the valley. All right. The other day, again, when we were talking, Tom, you told me about some Japanese families that lived out here in the valley.
Yes, there were.
Tell us about that.
The area had a family right across the creek from us, and there were several families up the valley, lived up the valley, and no ranchers wanted to mess with grapes or pears or anything else like that. So the Japanese handled all the fruit and the picking and the pruning and all that. It was handled by Japanese families.
And then what happened to those families? Do you know what happened to them during World War II?
Yes, they were. The ones across the creek were sent down and lived down at San Ferran, I think, in below San Francisco. They had a place where they raised their kids and so forth. And some of them went north to camps up in the north. Their basic problem was that what they owned, like trucks and furniture and stuff like that, in many cases was mishandled, and they lost it. But some of them were able to recoup pretty well too, actually. We kept some of their stuff here for the ones across the creek, who took care of our orchards and that sort of thing.
So they not only owned land, but they also helped on some of the other ranches and farms. Is that how they made their living?
Well, yeah, they basically they were doing most of that type of agricultural work.
John Muir was a neighbor. Did your family have any connection, or did your family know John Muir at all?
He and my father were good friends. In fact, my father was named as a pallbearer when he was buried.
Oh, really?
And I could remember John Muir when we were very young. I remember one time Mother took us to town in a buggy, and she stopped to see John on the way back, and I can remember here was with his long white beard and so forth, and we were practically sitting in his lap, actually.
Really, really. I understand he liked children, so he was fond of children, I think. That's what I've heard.
You liked what?
He was fond of children.
Oh, I presume so. He certainly was nice to us.
Did he ever tell you stories?
Oh, I don't remember that sort of thing.
We were only 2 when he died.
You were 2, that's right, that's right. What about John Sweat? He was also a neighbor. Was your family friendly with John Sweat's family?
Not particularly. Of course, we knew them, and they were part of the area. John Sweat himself was the superintendent of schools in San Francisco, and so my father, a lot of the time, took care of the ranch for him, superficially, not actually doing the work, but taking care of what came up and so forth. And I think John, young John and young Frank were closer to our age. Young John spent his life in bed. He never got up, during the day at least. Frank was around here. He was headed up the pear orchard business in the area.
The 1906 earthquake, your family was living here.
Yes.
Did you ever hear stories of any damage?
Well, that's an interesting thing in our lives. Our mother was in San Francisco in the hospital. She had an operation, and here on the ranch, they milked the cows and put the milk in big pans about so big and about so high, and when the cream came to the top, they skimmed off the cream, and that was collected together and shipped to San Francisco to make butter. And when the earthquake happened, there was a big room full of these pans on racks, and happened that above them was a big demijohn of well,
Cider. Cider.
No.
Vinegar.
Anyway, it fell, and the milk fell, and it all collected together, and the stuff in the jug made the milk congeal, so that the house was a mess.
Oh, this was inside the house?
Yes, that was it.
So the milk and the vinegar?
It was in a room in the house, and the area out here was affected. Trees and so forth were affected.
So your mother's in San Francisco, and your father is here.
Yeah.
Did he try to find? I mean, how did they know she was all right?
Pardon?
How did they? Your father was here.
Yeah.
Your mother was in San Francisco in the hospital. How did he find out whether she was all right?
Well, he took a horse and went to Oakland, and it was against the law to go across the bay at that time because of the problems involved. But he found a way to get across to San Francisco, and he finally found her. She was in a tent out in one of the parks in San Francisco. The hospital had moved everybody into this tent area.
So she was in a tent, probably in Golden Gate Park. Golden Gate Park.
Well, it was out, yes, in that area.
So did he stay there with her, or what did he do?
No, he had friends in San Francisco, and they took took her and took care of her when he came back and took care of the ranch.
Do you remember the ferries out in the strait? Did you take the ferries over to the Benicia area?
Yes, that was the only way to get across for years. There's a Martinez ferry that went across through Benicia, and when we went to Sacramento or went up that area, you had to go across. That was what you did. Then they built a bridge down at Vallejo, and we could go across on the bridge at Vallejo.
Martinez Bridge. All right. Let's go back to the creek for a minute. Let's talk about the creek. Over the years, there have been some organizations that have formed to try and protect the creek. Were you involved in any of those activities?
No, I think that all that started up relatively recently. There were several families living along the creek in Martinez, and they were involved, but out here there was no involvement out this far.
Okay, like Friends of Alhambra Creek, or
No,
you didn't participate?
that was Martinez business, not ours.
Do you worry about what's going to happen with the creek? Do you worry about the quality of water and just how the creek is going to affect our lives?
Not particularly. I've always done things that help as far as we're concerned out here, but for the most part, the creek ran free down further south than this, or further north than this.
Was your family careful about what they put into the creek?
No.
No. Oh, okay.
The creek was.
No.
If you had something you didn't want, what would we do? We'll throw it in the creek.
I'm sorry, we didn't hear that, Tom. What was that?
I say, if we had something we didn't want and asked the family what to do with it, they'd say, oh, we'll throw it in the creek.
What are some examples of that?
Examples of that?
Yeah.
Tin cans and bottles and junk of all kinds.
Nothing big. I mean, we never threw anything away that was worth anything. But just household junk went down the creek.
Did you get any trash coming from above you that flowed down into your part of the creek? No.
Were there people living further up above you on the creek?
Yes, there was a house up half a mile up in what's the park now, of course. There were people lived there, and they opened the back door and dumped everything in. The house was right on the creek, and they just opened the back door and dumped the stuff into the creek.
So some of that must have made its way down. Were you ever cautioned about playing in parts of the creek?
No.
No? It was your playground, huh?
Things weren't as advanced as that.
But you're healthy. You're certainly healthy, so it didn't do you any harm.
Did you ever build anything on the creek, like any forts or anything like that when you were a kid? Did you make any dams in the creek or anything like that?
No, we didn't do that. And the creek would there was a lot of rain in those days. It was much wetter than it has been recently. And at times the creek could be running 4 or 5 feet deep, or better even. And so that washed everything out completely clean, right? Everything went down to Martinez.
So that was in the winter?
Pardon?
That was in the winter? It would run that high in the winter?
Yes, yes. Well, in the winter and spring when the rains were.
Yeah. And how deep was it in the summer?
Oh, maybe 6 inches. Just nice little creek to play in.
Has the vegetation changed? In the vegetation, the plants, the trees? Has it changed? Is there more vegetation, less than when you lived here, or what, earlier years?
I'm not.
Has the vegetation,
Oh,
plant life?
vegetation?
Uh-huh.
No, I think there's probably been more stuff growing in the creek than there was then, because the creek at that time ran high sometimes, and that would wash out. And now it hasn't run high for years.
Really? Did you ever plant anything by the creek? Or did you just let it, whatever grows there naturally?
Oh, it just left it completely alone as far as that's concerned. We didn't have anything. It was just a part of life. It wasn't anything that you'd spend a lot of effort and time on.
So you're glad to have it there.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a barn over here to my right. I guess, what is that, south? Can you tell me about that barn?
Ernie, can I get you to put your hand down a little bit? You're covering your
Tom?
mouth.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, this particular barn here, the roof is not the original roof. The original roof was shakes, but the barn itself was over across the creek when my grandfather bought the place, and my father, when they split up the place and my sisters took that side and he took this side, he moved that barn over, completely rebuilt it here, and then eventually about 1918, I think, they put this tin roof on. And other than that, it's the same old barn that's been around here for 100 years.
100 years. So it is an old barn.
Yes, it's
You
old.
still use it, right?
Hmm?
You still use the barn?
Oh, yes, I should say we do.
Yeah. And we see horses here. What are the? Do you keep horses?
Yes. We have, they're out on the hills here. We board horses for people during the winter when they can't take care of them themselves. They bring them here and we take care of them for them. And we have 8 or 10 horses like that all the time, sometimes more.
Sometimes more. That's a lot of work, isn't it?
And we have 2 or 3 horses of our own here.
And how long have you been boarding horses? Is that something that
No, it's about 20 years, I guess, something like that.
Can you talk about some of the other animals that you've had?
Well, we always had cows, and we would milk the cows and use the milk and the cream and so forth. That while I was young, we always had maybe 8 or 10 cows, and we would raise the calves and slaughter the calves, and they'd take them down to Oakland to meat market down there, that type of thing.
Can you talk a little bit more about your routine for milking the cows? Like what time you got up in the morning to do that?
That was a part of life that's is best forgotten.
Well, we're not familiar with it, so we're really interested to hear about it.
The problem with that was that we were going to school, and we had to leave fairly early to take the bus to the school in Martinez. And before we went, the cows had to be milked, and the milk had to be separated. We had a hand-driven separator to separate the milk from the cream. And all that was going on in the morning before you went to school. Then you got home from school in the evening, you went and got the cows and brought them in from the hills and milked them and separated the milk. So that went on all the time, every day, except in the summer when the cows dried up. But it made a busy life, believe me.
So how many hours would you say that took out of your day? How many hours?
Oh,
Tom, can we get you to put your hands down?
Maybe.
Put your hands down.
For the video.
Keep your hands down.
Oh, okay. The hours, all this took probably 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening.
Tom, they might be interested in the feral cats. You had massive herds of feral cats here when I was growing up.
I'm not hearing.
The cats, the huge herds that kept the fields clear of mice, and you also gave them the remnants of the milk. Hundreds of them.
Cats.
Cats.
Feral cats.
I don't remember any quantity like that.
That's what it appeared to me. We're just all over the place.
We had lots of cats.
Did you always have dogs? You have 3 dogs now. Did you always have dogs?
No, we had cats.
You had cats.
We rarely had a dog when I was young.
My mother had a little fox terrier that she was very fond of. But that, a little later, that would have been after we were in high school, I guess.
Did you go into town very often, into Martinez?
No.
Did you
When you had to hitch up the horse and the wagon and drive to Martinez, all of which took an hour or better, and then you worked. Whatever you bought in Martinez cost money, and you didn't use that. Didn't eat. You ate what you raised. You didn't eat what you bought. So basically, once a week or something like that would be all you'd go to Martinez.
You mentioned that you ate what you raised. Can you tell us a little bit more about the vegetables and fruits that you raised here? What kinds?
Well, we had apples, we had peaches, and we had pears, and as far as fruit's concerned, and there was a big fig tree, and we had big black figs all over the place.
Beautiful apricots.
And apricots, and as far as the vegetables is concerned, we'd raise practically any vegetable you want to mention. Dad was interested in the vegetable garden. He kept it going fine, and we had lots of vegetables.
So as children, did you help with that? Did you help take care of the garden? As children, did you help take care of the garden? Did you do any of the
you did.
watering?
You did whatever was necessary, and the family worked as a unit. Mother helped outside, and when Dad was sick or something, well, she'd milk the cows and do all that, and we were, of course, there to help. Anything that was needed, we helped. Sometimes.
Did your mother do a lot of canning of
Yes.
vegetables
Yeah.
Not vegetables.
or fruits?
All the fruit.
Fruit.
Vegetables.
Several hundred
Didn't
quarts of.
pressure cookers to make it safe.
So did she have either of you helping with the canning of the fruits?
Helped wherever was necessary. We'd help we helped everything, as I remember it.
I'm still canning fruit. It goes in such a habit.
They talk about watering. How did you water? Did you bring water from the creek to irrigate your?
Had a tank up on the top of the hill right over here, which is still there, or not the same tank, but the tank is still there, and we pipe water from further up the canyon into the tank and then ran it down here.
We had faucets and hoses.
You had faucets.
Do you remember who put that tank there and when?
The original tank?
Yes.
Well, my father put it there. I would suspect probably about 1900, something like that.
Uh-huh. And so before that, how were the plants irrigated?
Well, they just ran water in a pipe. The tank, the reason for the tank was that sometimes the pipe would break and then you'd have water while that was being fixed. But before that, boy, the pipe came down, and I can remember being up in the middle of the winter up in the canyon up here trying to fix the pipe and find out where the break was, that sort of thing.
So this tank, I'm just trying to know where it is. It's on your property, correct?
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
How big is the ranch? Can you talk about how big it is? And you mentioned splitting it up at some point between the different...
Well, when my grandfather bought the place, it was those hills on that side and back up the canyon up here and down the valley, down on that way. And that gradually, for the honest truth, most of it was taken back on mortgages because he didn't have money enough to buy it all originally, so he had mortgaged a lot of it to get the money to, and so that was eventually picked up by the mortgage owners. So it's hard to say at any one time exactly what was ranch and what was not ranch.
Well, can you say generally how big it was originally and
well,
how big it is now?
I'm not sure about the original size, but it must have been 400 or 500 acres, something of that sort.
And now how big is it?
65.
In those early years, money was scarce. There wasn't a lot of money. Did you barter with your neighbors for things, you know, food items that you needed? Did you barter, you know, trade?
Yes, there was a certain amount of that going on all the time. That everybody helped everybody if they could.
We took eggs to the stores in Martinez and traded it for food.
Really? Items that you couldn't grow on the ranch or the farm.
Flour and sugar.
And did anybody ever come down to your ranch to get water?
Oh, yeah.
You had water that maybe others didn't?
The Winslows, who lived over just on the other side of the drop off over here, had very poor water and very little of it. And so they were hauling drinking water most of the time. Really? And they'd come by and with a little tank on a wagon and fill the tank up and take it home and use it and then come back and get some more when they lost that.
Do you remember any of your special friends as you were growing up, living out here in the country? Did you have a lot of friends?
Well, the Winslows had 2 daughters, and they were our friends, play with them and so forth. And there were several people up the valley that had people. The Uphams had family, and they were friends.
The Gemettes on the Sweat Ranch also had a couple of daughters that we all played with.
Where'd the Johnsons come in?
Oh, well, they were Martinez.
Okay.
They were downtown.
Town folk. That was
folks,
after high school mainly, or high school age. But when we were little, it was these right here, were these Gemettes and the Uphams and the Winslows. That was Ruth Jameson, that's Winslow.
And what kinds of things did you do when you played together? Did you play here on the ranch? Did you?
Yeah. Played in the Sweat Ranch, we played a lot in the winery area. In summer, it was always cool in there. And the Winslows, we'd play under the house because it was cool compared to... we played a lot of things like Run Sheep Run, things that you probably never heard of.
Tell us about that. Run, Sheep, Run.
Yeah.
Tell us how you played that. How do you play that?
Oh, I don't remember all the details. Somebody made a map, and then you went and tried to hide on it or something. I forget.
So you pretend to be a sheep?
I don't remember why the sheep came in, but we played a lot of running kids' games.
Mostly outdoors.
All outdoors.
All outdoors. Let's see. I was going to ask about social events. Did you ever go into town for social activities? Remember?
Seldom.
Did you go to the movies?
No.
No, didn't go to the movies. When did you get your first car? Automobile?
1918, I think.
What kind was it?
Studebaker.
Studebaker.
Because they made good wagons.
Right. Oh, that's right. They started making wagons, didn't they?
We had a Studebaker wagon, and so it was a good wagon.
Oh, and you bought it in Martinez?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was your father that bought? Yeah, that would be your father. What was your first car, Tom?
Old Ford, I think, as I remember somebody's old Ford.
Was it a new one? You didn't buy it new?
It was a long time for it. There were already new cars.
Were the Depression years hard on families living out in the country like this?
Which one?
The Depression years. You know, during the Depression.
The Depression?
Did it affect you?
Well, that hurt the people in the valley quite a bit, I think, because the sale of fruit and so forth dropped off.
Really? People couldn't afford to buy the fruit, is that it?
Well, yeah. The tendency was to do as cheaply as you possibly could because there wasn't much money.
So you said that people helped each other around here. Was that especially the case during the Depression years? And can you talk about how people helped each other?
Oh, well, that like I can remember my father, somebody would get sick during the harvest season, like when he was cutting hay or something like that, and he'd take his equipment over and cut their hay for them and even shock it up for them, that type of thing. It was usually something of considerable warmth. In other words, it wasn't little smiddly things mostly. It was things like collecting fruit or hay or something.
So that's quite a lot to offer somebody if you already have that to do for yourself.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So that must create a real sense
Yeah,
of
we tended to have the equipment here like mowing machines and rakes and that type of stuff, where some people weren't as well off or weren't as careful, maybe, and didn't have as good equipment or some sort.
So you would loan your equipment? Is that what you're saying?
Pardon?
Would you loan out your equipment to
Yeah,
other people?
that's right. And take the equipment yourself and help them with it if they were sick or something. Well, you would do the work for them. I can remember several times when our father took his team and helped somebody out with cutting hay or baling it or something, not baling it, but shocking it, that type of thing.
So when people helped each other out, did you provide something for them in return, or was it just that you would sort of expect that if you were in need sometime, then they would
Right.
come help you. How did that
It
work?
was help when it was necessary, and not necessarily repaid sometimes, but not necessarily.
Hands down.
Hands.
Huh? Oh, well, that's what
We want to see your face.
I get my hands up and you can't hear it. Eh?
Do you remember a man who worked for the circus who stored his animals in Briones? I've heard stories about circus animals living out in this area.
Well, now, is this in recent years?
I thought it was quite a while.
What was it, elephants or something like that? Well, that was up. There's a road over here that goes all the way over to Lafayette area, and part way up there's a ranch, and it had a big, fairly big barn and so forth, and at one time it was taken over and they had elephants there, and other times there were other animals there. So yes, that
Was winter quarters, wasn't it?
Hmm?
Winter quarters.
Winter quarters, mostly sick and so forth, I think, probably.
That goes on to fairly recent times. I can
Yeah.
recall early in our living out here, so that'd be in maybe the 60s, 70s, going up that road and seeing those animals. So that's not that far back.
I've heard that some monkeys escaped and that they live in the creek. Do you ever see monkeys that live in the creek? Have you heard about that?
No.
No.
Yeah.
I think
It's an
that's been
urban
around for years. I've never seen a monkey.
And also, I've heard that there were bears found living on San Pablo Dam Road up until the mid-40s. Do you remember ever seeing bears around this area?
No.
Bears?
No. No.
What about elk? Elk and deer? Do you have elk and deer? Elk?
No elk.
No elk?
No.
You can tell I'm not a biologist. Deer? Deer?
Lots of
Well,
deer.
the deer are coming back. They were gone most of our youth.
Oh, really?
We had coyotes and wildcats. The coyotes would sit up on the hill there, and you could hear them at night with that mournful sound they make.
Mountain lions. Have you ever seen a mountain lion here, Tom? No.
No, there were other like
We had lots of skunks.
yeah, that kind
Ever
of.
get sprayed?
Yes, I did.
You did? Tell us
Right.
about that.
Right in the face, all over me.
Oh, how old were you?
Oh, maybe 10 or so. They'd gotten into the chickens, and they got the kids, and they were on a trap, and I was trying to pull the trap out from under the chickens, and this skunk just got me, and of course, my mother, whoop, and then turned the hose on me and buried all of my clothes.
How long did you smell like a skunk for?
Well, I think I got washed off very quickly.
Just with water, or did she use something else?
I don't remember except that I got scrubbed. And my clothes all got buried.
Were you more careful around skunks after that?
Sure was.
It's an IQ test.
What about other animal encounters, or like birds, or anything, any other kinds of animals that you've had around this
We
area?
had opossums.
Uh-huh.
Remember the one that had babies? They were up in the tree, all these little ones up and one along the creek here, up in the trees.
Did they come down? Did the babies come down, and did you get near them,
No,
or you just saw them?
the mother took them off someplace. But they also went after eggs and chickens, so they were another thing you had to worry about.
Did you have traps for them also?
Mm-hmm. And sometimes you catch them, and not always. They were very clever.
What did you put in the traps?
I don't know what they put in traps. I think they were just sat at the entrance.
Did you put some kind of food in there? Some kind of...
Food items of some sort, usually, I think. They would go in traps, but...
They were very clever at getting the food and not getting trapped.
What about raccoons? Did you see?
Oh, we had lots of raccoons.
Were there,
They also like chickens and eggs.
yeah. Maybe Tom could use one.
Thank you.
Have you noticed any change in the populations of raccoons? Like, were there...
Oh, well, I haven't lived here for so long.
Uh,
Tom's the only one that would know that.
All those things tended to get shot out. People would have some reason or other to hunt them out, and they'd shoot them. So most
raccoons.
Yeah, that type of animal. Coyotes and raccoons and those things. I think became rare, you might say, almost in the area.
Do you think that the reason for the decline in the population of mountain lions and coyotes has something to do with the hunting, or what do you think that's due to?
Well, I think originally there was fairly good population of those sort of things around here, but then as people moved in, they tended to, like your raccoons and those sort of things would attack your chicken yards, and they tended to get wiped out.
I think they've all moved into downtown Martinez. That's where I live, and there are an abundance of skunks and raccoons.
We had lots of quail.
Oh.
Used to have quail we eat quite often, but you had to watch for buckshot.
As we approach your property, there's an area where there's a lot of trees, like Christmas trees. Can you tell us about that?
The Christmas trees over here? In 1972, Bob Jones, who lived down the valley, saw me cultivating over there one day and came in and said, what do you think about planting Christmas trees here instead of what I was going to plant? And we made a deal, and it's been a tremendously important thing for this place. Every year they have Christmas sales. You probably are aware that they bring in trees from their place up in the mountains, and they raise the trees here. People come and select their own tree, and they bring trees down and they take one of those. But that as a source of income for this ranch, that's a really big thing, because you can't raise much that has real value on a small place like this. So the Christmas trees provide a big source of income for the ranch.
For your ranch.
Yeah.
For your ranch. So do they lease the property? They lease that land from you? Is that how that works?
Well, the way it works, actually, we get a percentage of what they sell on it.
All right. Well, Brett's telling me we only have 2 more minutes on this tape. Tom, do you have anything you want to say before we change tapes? How has it been a good life living on the ranch?
Well, I wouldn't want to have lived anywhere else.
Really?
I was asked to go back and work in Philadelphia, to go back and work in Detroit, and I refused at some considerable trouble to myself for doing it, but I refused to go back there, and I didn't want to leave here.
You didn't want to leave. Well, I think that's a nice note to end on. Thank you, Tom. We appreciate your time and your generosity with your stories and your life.
Well, you're welcome. I hope I helped.
Well, you did. You absolutely did. Thank you.